I'm going to tell you 3 strange and unbelievable stories, and at the end of the video, you have to guess which ones are real and which ones are fake. At the end of the video, we'll reveal which stories actually happened and which ones are purely fictional. Have you ever gotten into a taxi and, after a while, felt like it was going in a completely different direction, making fear slowly creep into your mind? Our first story is about Frank, a man trying to escape from prison, but he makes a terrible mistake in the process. The first story is called The Wrong Escape. Frank was a 28-year-old man from San Francisco who had been in prison for several months due to fraud. Like other inmates, he was often assigned to clean different areas of the prison, or wash, dry, and organize prisoners' clothes. The laundry and clothing organization area was located in the basement of the prison, and every day a group of inmates was sent there for this task. Life in prison was unbearable for Frank, and he was desperately looking for a way to escape. One day, while working in the basement, an unusual idea crossed his mind. He noticed that after the clothes were sorted, they were placed inside a large container, which was then loaded onto a truck and transported to an unknown location. Frank assumed that these clothes were being sent to a laundry facility outside the prison, so he decided to use this as his escape route. One day, while sorting clothes, he secretly climbed into one of the containers and covered himself with a pile of clothes to avoid suspicion. A while later, a prison guard moved the containers onto a truck, which then left for its destination. When the truck finally arrived at its location, the containers were unloaded into a dark and silent place. A few minutes later, Frank cautiously lifted his head, only to realize he was inside another prison. It turned out that the clothes weren't being sent to a laundry facility outside, but rather from one prison to another. Frank had managed to escape from his original prison, only to end up in a completely different one. Eventually, he climbed out of the pile of clothes, surrendered himself, and was returned to his original prison. From that day on, he spent the rest of his life behind bars, never getting another chance to escape. Now, it's your turn to figure out whether this story is real or fake. Stay with us until the end of the video. I'm sure there have been moments in your life when you felt sudden pain in your body, but then, out of nowhere, the pain disappears, only to return a few seconds or minutes later. Our second story, The Power of Love, is about exactly that. Jack was a 64-year-old man living in a small village. He had children and grandchildren, but due to his difficult personality, he chose to live alone. However, the important thing to note is that Jack was paralyzed and relied on a wheelchair to move around. One day, his granddaughter Emily came to visit him, but as usual, Jack's harsh attitude pushed her away. He told her to leave his house. Emily had come for 2 reasons. One was to take care of her grandfather, and the other was to discuss selling one of his lands as part of her inheritance. When Emily brought up the subject, Jack became furious and demanded that she leave. But Emily refused to listen and decided to stay at her grandfather's house for a while to take care of him. Even so, Jack continued to treat her poorly. A few days later, another argument broke out between them. This time, Emily lost hope and decided to leave for good. As Jack watched her walk away, he saw Emily climb onto a tractor in his field. He curiously observed what she was doing, but suddenly, something shocking happened. As Emily was driving, she fainted and fell off the tractor, landing behind it. The problem was that the tractor was on a downward slope and was slowly moving toward her. If 20 seconds passed, the tractor would run over her and kill her. Jack, witnessing the terrifying scene, tried desperately to move toward her, but as he struggled, he fell off his wheelchair. Watching the tractor inch closer and closer to his unconscious granddaughter, fear took over. He fought with all his strength, trying to stand up and walk. After a few moments of intense effort, Jack managed to move his legs. Slowly but surely, he forced himself forward until he reached the tractor, and with great difficulty, he stopped it. As soon as the tractor was no longer a threat, Jack lost control of his legs again and collapsed to the ground. Jack might have been harsh with his granddaughter, but that didn't mean he didn't love her. Now the question is, was this story real, or was it made up by our video creators? Stay with us until the end of the video to find out. Let's move on to the third story. Many people believe that when someone dies, their connection to the world is completely severed. But what do you think? Do you believe it's possible for someone who has died to somehow return to this world? Our final story, called The Savior, is about exactly that. Jessica was a 37-year-old teacher who was known for being strict. Because of this, many of her students didn't like her. One day, Jessica gave her students a test. When the exam was over, she asked them to place their papers on her desk and leave the classroom. All the students followed her instructions and left, except for one. Jessica asked the student to turn in his test, but the boy seemed shy and hesitant. Eventually, he handed over his paper. What Jessica saw shocked her. The paper wasn't a test at all. It was something completely different. It was a letter. The letter read, "They are coming. You should get up from your seat and come stand next to me. I don't want what happened to me to happen to you." At the bottom of the letter, the boy's name was written, John. Jessica was confused. She didn't understand what was happening. She decided to walk toward John to ask him what he meant. At that very moment, a sudden burst of gunfire rained down on her desk and chair. But because Jessica was standing next to John, she was completely unharmed. The gunmen were part of a gang driving past the school. From their moving car, they had opened fire into the classroom. Terrified, Jessica wanted to run out of the room. But when she turned around, John was gone. He had disappeared. Moments later, the principal and other teachers rushed into the classroom to see what had happened. Jessica told them everything. But what she heard in response was even more terrifying. The principal said, "The boy who saved your life, John, was actually murdered in this very classroom 2 years ago." He explained that John had been killed in the exact same way, shot by a gang driving past the school. And just like that, we've reached the end of our last story. Now it's time to reveal which stories were real and which were fake. But before that, let's do a quick recap. Story number 1, the wrong escape. Frank wanted to escape from prison. He hid inside a laundry cart, hoping to jump out at the right moment and run away. However, instead of being taken outside, the laundry was being transported to another prison. This meant Frank escaped one prison, only to end up in another. Story number 2, the power of love. Emily went to visit her paralyzed grandfather Jack to take care of him, but Jack didn't treat her well. When Emily was about to leave, she suddenly fainted and fell behind a moving tractor. The tractor was rolling backward, and in just a few seconds, it would run over Emily and kill her. Jack, desperate to save her, somehow managed to stand up from his wheelchair and stop the tractor just in time. Story number 3, the savior, Jessica, received a mysterious letter from one of her students. It warned her, "Get up from your seat or you'll be killed." Jessica stood up, and at that moment, gunshots were fired into the classroom. Because she had moved, the bullets missed her. Later, she discovered the shocking truth. The student who had saved her life, John, had actually died 2 years earlier in the same classroom, killed by a similar drive-by shooting. You now have 10 seconds to guess which stories were real and which were fake. Remember, anything is possible. Maybe all the stories are fake. Maybe all the stories are real. Or maybe it's a mix of both. Let's start with story number 1. If you think the prison escape story was real, you guessed correctly. This story actually happened. Now, let's talk about story number 2. If you believe it was fake, you're right. There's no evidence of Jack suddenly standing up from his wheelchair. This story was completely made up. And finally, story number 3. If you thought this ghost story was based on real events, you got tricked. This story was completely fake and was created just to fool you. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Goodbye.